Ladies and gentlemen, as we talked about in the last video, there was some pretty positive tariff headlines in specific regards to China over the past 24 hours or so. It looks like a large chunk of what is important to Wall Street, electronics, semiconductors, hard drives, things like that, important things like Apple, their whole business essentially, is going to be excluded from the tariffs out of China. Now, this is probably going to be positive news starting off the week. Now, there's one more headline that we got today that I think is also pretty good. China calls on the United States to, quote, completely cancel tariffs. Now, let me give you the rundown here. The whole China tariff thing, I don't think it has anything to do with anything besides TikTok. Trump wants TikTok. That's what this is about. Now, I think ultimately these tariffs are about bringing important things back to the U.S. Medicines, semiconductors, right? But it's not about tariffing, freaking plastic water bottle or clothes or just the blanket tariffs, if you will, that apply to everything, okay, coming out of China and really other countries. It's more about being self-sufficient to the extent of if we were to go to war with China, we would be okay, right? So I think this is the rough start of negotiations with China. And that's what Wall Street is going to love coming tomorrow, and at least for the first half of this week. Now, that is especially good news for Tesla, because Tesla is, one of the big companies in China that is an American-based company that does a lot of business in China. China is Tesla's most important market for the last almost 2 years now. Pretty consistently, China sells more vehicles than the US, which is crazy. Nike's pretty big in China, Starbucks has a role in China, Apple has a role in China, but there's not that many companies that do a lot of business in China. So I think specifically Tesla actually could benefit from this more than some other companies. Now, Apple's going to be the biggest beneficiary because most of their manufacturing is done in China and in that general region. And they're probably going to do very well coming tomorrow. And I think overall, it's probably going to be a very good day. And again, I think this is the start of negotiations with China. Because, again, I think it's about TikTok. And slowly, it's not going to happen overnight like Trump wants, getting, pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, blah, 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 important things to be manufactured in the U.S. Trump knows that doesn't happen overnight. Come on now. He knows that. It's not about destroying the economy and preventing that from happening for longer, right? Which is essentially what the tariffs in their current form were doing. Now, the other part of the pivot has to do with the bond market. TLT, long duration yields, have been skyrocketing, above 4.5% on the 10-year Treasury. This is a major problem. The velocity of this, mixed with a stock sell-off, is crazy. Normally, this doesn't happen. Normally, when stocks sell off 20%, TLT goes up. People actually buy the bonds. But not this time. Somebody is selling the bonds. China, Japan, someone. And I actually wouldn't be surprised if with these tariff negotiations, maybe there's a stipulation that like China has to buy US bonds, or Japan, or, Japan is already the largest holder, or some of these other countries. Now, again, I think it's the start of negotiations with China. We don't know what the details of that are going to look like. And this is just my opinion. But China's finally starting to say some, at least, having some dialogue here, which I think the markets are going to like. Now, we do have major events coming this week. We have earnings. We've talked about that in the prior videos. Earnings is going to be weird because we're not going to get guidance, which could actually be kind of positive. Instead of companies giving you bad guidance, not giving any guidance is probably a good thing. Like Apple, they haven't given guidance for years. Nobody even cares. Nobody expects guidance from Apple. Okay, that could actually be a positive. The big event this week for Tesla, for markets, is actually on Wednesday. Retail sales, number one for March. Now, we talked about this in the last video as well, but GDP is tracking negative 0.3%, excluding gold imports. Okay, including gold imports, you're down 2.4% on the quarter. Depending on what retail sales look like on Wednesday, you're either going to more so solidify a negative GDP report for Q1, or it could start to look more positive. Retail sales is huge on Wednesday. You're expecting a really strong number of positive 1.3%. Last month was positive 0.2%. What's also big on Wednesday is Fed Jerome Powell. Fed Jerome Powell will speak at 1:30 p.m. All eyes are going to be on Powell. Okay, specifically the bond market and potentially like starting to buy bonds again. That's kind of what Fed Collins alluded to on Friday. That was partially the reason why the markets did well, because when you're going through something like this, where the bond market's getting wrecked and there's no end in sight, that puts financial institutions at risk. That puts systemic risk into the economy. And I think that's the last thing the Fed wants to do. So I think we're going to get some pretty bullish comments, dovish comments from Jerome Powell on Wednesday. So Wednesday's the big day. On Thursday, building permits, initial jobless claims, Philadelphia Fed manufacturing data, prices paid, new orders, employment, all of that. And then on Friday, you don't have anything. You have a speech from Fed Daily. So the second half of this upcoming week, not as important. Now, when it comes to earnings, Thursday is the big day. And just to give you a little bit of a rundown again, TSMC is going to be huge. That's the big one, because it's going to tell us what demand looks like for semiconductors. Right now, with CapEx slowing down, semiconductors have been the biggest source of CapEx, right? Companies have really upped their CapEx, capital expenditures, of semiconductors. Does that pull back a little bit, or is it continuing? Okay, that's going to tell us a lot. American Express is also pretty important on Thursday because of the state of the consumer. How's the consumer doing? If the consumer's doing well, then maybe some of the recession fears are overblown, especially retail sales. If that comes out good on Wednesday, mix that with American Express that has positive things to say, TSMC that doesn't show a disaster coming for NVIDIA earnings, I could make a pretty good bull case for maybe even Thursday and Friday. Now, the first half of this week, of course, is going to be dominated by tariff headlines. But the fact that you're not seeing any escalation over this weekend is good news. To a certain extent, when markets are this fearful, this washed out, this scared, no news is good news. And you're kind of in a no news environment right now. You didn't get much news besides the good news of the tariff exemptions and what looks like China starting to want to negotiate a bit. Now, again, for Tesla, this is critical. Now, we're about 2 weeks, roughly, away from Tesla's earnings. And there's been a lot of good news recently that people are really overlooking. The Model Y is selling very well. The political distractions are coming to an end from what I can tell. It doesn't look like that is really hindering demand for Teslas at this point. And I think a lot of the bears, or really people in general, are stuck in that mentality of things are still bad for Tesla. In fact, I don't think that's true. Now, even from a technical perspective, you hit that low on April 7th, even as the markets hit new lows on April 8th and April 9th. Well, what happened? Tesla did not. That's what FundStrat's Tom Lee said, and we covered that in yesterday's video, where it's actually a good sign what Tesla's doing right now, that it's not flushing into new lows, as Tesla is one of the biggest, risk on long-term growth stocks that is well known by everyone. Now, for things to look better from here, you want to get above that 200-day moving average at about $258 per share. You get above that, and you could make a run to the 290s, maybe even the 300s this week. Again, depending on negotiations, this is a very news-driven market, and any headlines that we get have the potential to really move things. Now, keep in mind you have bounced quite a bit from the lows, albeit we were only briefly at those lows of 480, 481. Like, we were not there a long time, let's be honest. But you're still down almost 13% from all-time highs. There is still a considerable amount of room you could rise from here before maybe you're too far done to the upside. Just to get back to the 300-day moving average would be upside of almost 3% from here. To get back to the 200-day moving average at about 570 would be upside of about 7%. That's where I would see things getting a little bit overdone to the upside, around that 200-day moving average at 570. That is a target range we could be looking at with positive developments out of China negotiations. And I think it's really in everyone's best interest at this point, the US and China, to start negotiating these things. Now, tariffs can work very well if they're done correctly. Okay? Tariffs should, in theory, only be used to protect important industries. Okay? Now, assuming it just feels like to me Trump wants America to be in a position where if we had to go to war with somebody, we're totally self-sufficient to handle operations in the US. That is medicine, that is semiconductors, that is, military equipment, right? That's, I think, what he wants here with TikTok. And maybe a 10% blanket tariff. I don't think that's going away just to bring in some revenue. That's what I think he actually wants. But you don't do these things overnight. And it doesn't help your case if you nuke the economy at the same time. I don't think that was ever the goal or the idea. I think the idea was to rapidly bring countries to the negotiations table. And in the meantime, probably again work out some deals to buy treasuries, things like that. But in the tails, right? In the tail risks of how things could play out, the tails are always fatter than you think. Okay, I forget who says this. Maybe it's Warren Buffett. But if you're looking at a bell curve, okay, let me just demonstrate this. A bell curve goes like this. Flat, goes up, down, flat again, right? The tails are the flat side. They are the extreme sides of outcomes, okay? I believe it's Warren Buffett. Double check me, fact check me down below in the comment section. But the tails being fatter than you think actually just says that the extreme risks are larger than you think at any given time. There is a risk out there that Trump has completely lost his mind and he gives a crap about the economy, doesn't care, he's doing this just to do it, and he's lost his marbles. Okay, that is a risk. In that scenario, stocks are done. Okay, you're falling a lot more. And you got to be prepared for that as a potential outcome. There's also a potential outcome where all the other tariffs get dropped down to 10% baseline tariff with stair-stepping of tariffs increasing on semiconductors or pharmaceuticals, whatever it is. Okay, that's more of a positive potential outcome. I think we're heading more towards a positive outcome here. At least it seems like it over this weekend. Some of the comments that we're getting out of China and out of Trump, especially with the exclusions, where I think investors are going to be a little bit more confident here to put some money to work. Now, the big question is the damage already done? Okay, it feels like it's been a long time, but it's only been like 9 days, roughly, since the tariffs actually were announced. So it hasn't been that much time. Fear really skyrocketed. And now, if the economic data does not justify the level of fear the recession calls out there, you're gonna see people get bullish on markets again. And I don't know if that's gonna happen, but I'm here to warn you that could happen. Now, if there's any stock in a positive scenario to be bullish on, I think Tesla is the standout here. Now, they report earnings in about 2 weeks again, It's all about the lower priced, Tesla that's supposed to be announced this quarter. We'll see. Who knows when it'll start production. If that gets kicked down the line, I think you're kind of priced for that. But again, we'll see. The robotaxi launch in Austin, that is well-known information at this point. I don't know how much that's actually being appreciated in the stock. That's up for debate. I think the other question is, how fast does that scale? That's going to be the next big question. And those two answers, whatever we hear on the earnings call, could determine whether or not Tesla is going to stay in the 200s or get back into the 300s, maybe the high 300s, or even back into the 400s if, a more positive outcome starts to arise from tariffs. Now, I don't know what's going to happen, but I do think this week could be a good week as long as we don't get more bad news on the tariffs. And again, if things go right this week, you could find yourself in the 290s, maybe even the low 300s. If things do not go well this week, I think you're still kind of in no man's land. You are above 250, that's a great sign, but below 250, you could be 250 to 215. That's kind of the range we've been in if you're below 250. Now, last time we kind of broke above 250 like this, we did rise to the 290s, so we'll see if that can happen again. I do think the odds of that are probably higher this upcoming week. I see positive things coming from Jerome Powell. The lack of guidance we get from corporate America, probably, I don't know how much of a positive it's going to be, but I don't think it's going to be a huge negative because you're kind of up for interpretation at that point. Retail sales, are they going to be as good as expected? Probably not. Are they going to be better than last month? Probably. If we get really bad data, that would definitely be a problem. And then China, tariffs, it looks like things are moving in the right direction. So as long as none of that is wildly off, should be a good week this week for Tesla. Let me know what you guys think about this down below in the comment section. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and I will see you in the next one.